Parents called me a disgrace compared to my golden child brother and disowned me. Now, the scent of fresh coffee and old books is something most people take for granted. But to me it smells like salvation. Standing in the center of my bookstore, Renaissance pages, I inhaled deeply, letting the aroma settle into my lungs. Around me, the morning light filtered through tall windows, painting golden rectangles across hardwood floors that I'd refinished myself. 6 employees were scattered throughout the 3-story space, shelving new arrivals and helping early customers navigate our extensive African American literature section. My store wasn't just a business. It was a cathedral for the written word, a sanctuary I'd built from nothing but stubbornness and spite. Hello friends, before I continue the story, please support the channel by becoming a subscriber and giving the video a like. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching right now. I ran my hand along the edge of the mahogany checkout counter. My fingers were clean now, moisturized even, but I could still remember when they were cracked and bleeding from hauling boxes in sub-zero temperatures. My parents used to tell me that a black man who read books instead of medical journals was wasting his potential. They used to say that opening a bookstore was tantamount to volunteering for poverty, that I might as well burn my college degree and join the ranks of the perpetually disappointed. "Marcus, you're doing that thing again," a voice called out from behind me. I turned to see Janelle, my wife, walking toward me with 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea in her hands. She was 7 months pregnant, moving with that careful waddle that made my heart swell every time I saw it. Her locks were pulled back in a colorful wrap, and despite the early hour, she radiated an energy that made everyone around her feel more alive. "Just taking inventory," I said, accepting the mug and kissing her forehead. "Gratitude inventory. You mean you're remembering how far you've come," she corrected, settling onto the leather armchair we kept near the register. "It's good to acknowledge that, baby, but don't let it consume you. The past is dead. Remember, we'd met at a poetry reading 4 years ago, back when my store was half its current size and I was living in a studio apartment above a nail salon. She was a social worker with a master's degree and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. I fell in love with her the moment she quoted James Baldwin while debating the merits of contemporary black fiction. Life wasn't just good anymore. It was transcendent. We had the brownstone in the historic district, we had the thriving business, and soon we'd have a son. I sipped my tea, feeling a rare moment of absolute contentment settle over me like a warm blanket. Then my phone vibrated on the counter, dancing across the wood like an angry insect. It wasn't a text alert, those were silent. This was a phone call, sustained and insistent. I glanced at the screen expecting to see a distributor's number, or maybe one of my employees calling in sick. The name displayed made my stomach drop like a stone into dark water. "Mom's cell." I froze completely. I hadn't seen those words illuminate my screen in 6 years. Not since the night I'd packed everything I owned into a borrowed van and driven away from my childhood home in the suburbs. The phone continued its frantic dance, the vibration growing more aggressive with each passing second. "Marcus?" Janelle asked, her voice dropping to that careful tone she used when she sensed danger. "Who is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at the screen, my throat constricting. My chest felt tight, a phantom pressure that made breathing difficult. It's strange how trauma lives in the body, how it can reduce a successful 31-year-old business owner to a trembling 25-year-old with nothing but dreams and debt. The sight of that caller ID transported me instantly backward, pulling me into a memory I'd spent years trying to bury. 6 years ago, that was when the fracture became a complete break. We were at Marcel's, one of those upscale French restaurants where the portions are microscopic and the waiters treat you like you're fortunate to be breathing their air. My parents, Dr. Leonard Hayes and Dr. Patricia Hayes, were practically glowing with pride. But their radiance wasn't directed at me, not even close. The true star of the evening was my older brother, Julian. Julian was 28 at the time, and he had just been promoted to chief resident in cardiothoracic surgery at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. He sat there in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost 3 months of my rent, discussing surgical techniques with our father like I wasn't even present. I felt completely invisible, a shadow at a table celebrating light. I had come straight from my job at the public library where I worked as a reference librarian, a position my parents considered beneath someone with my education. I was wearing a clean button-down shirt and slacks, but they were from Target, not Brooks Brothers. My father, Leonard, raised his glass of champagne and smiled broadly. "To Julian," he announced, his voice carrying across our section of the restaurant. "For proving that excellence is genetic, that the Hayes name will continue to represent the pinnacle of achievement in medicine and service." The table erupted in polite applause. Julian smiled, that modest smile he'd perfected, the one that said he was humble while simultaneously confirming his superiority. My mother, Patricia, reached over and squeezed Julian's hand, her eyes actually glistening with tears of joy. I gripped my water glass tighter, the condensation making my palms slick. "I have news too," I said, my voice stronger than I felt inside. "I've finally secured the loan. I'm signing the lease on a retail space next week. I'm opening the bookstore I've been planning." The silence that descended wasn't shocked or excited. It was disappointed. My mother set down her fork with an audible click, as if I just announced I had a terminal illness. "Oh, Marcus, please," she sighed, her face pinched with displeasure. "Are you really going to throw away your master's degree to play shopkeeper? It's frankly embarrassing for the family. Do you know what people will think?" "It's not playing shopkeeper, Mom," I argued, feeling heat rise up my neck. "It's cultural entrepreneurship. There are only 2 Black-owned bookstores in the entire metro area. There's a real need for what I'm trying to build." Julian leaned back in his chair, regarding me with what I can only describe as pity mixed with amusement. "Look, Mark, if you need extra money, just say so," he offered, swirling his champagne. "When I make department head in a couple years, I can probably get you hired in hospital administration. They're always looking for people to process insurance paperwork." They laughed at that, not uproariously, but enough. That polite, condescending laughter that's somehow worse than open mockery. My dream, my passion, my carefully researched business plan, it was all just material for their amusement, a punchline to pad their evening of self-congratulation. "I'm serious about this," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm quitting the library job. I'm putting everything into making this work." My father's expression transformed completely. The jovial smile vanished, replaced by cold disapproval. "If you quit a stable position with benefits to play at being some sort of book-selling revolutionary, you are a disgrace to this family," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "You're throwing away security for a childish fantasy. I will not have a son who is a failure tarnishing Julian's reputation in our community." He pointed his butter knife at me like a weapon. "If you walk away from that library job, Marcus, don't expect any financial support from us whatsoever. In fact, when you fail, and you absolutely will fail, don't bother coming back here with your hand out." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my napkin dramatically or storm out immediately. Instead, in that moment, watching them look at me with such undisguised contempt, I experienced a profound realization. I didn't belong in their world, had never belonged, and their rejection was actually liberating me from pretending otherwise. "Understood," I said quietly, standing up and placing my napkin on my untouched plate. "Enjoy your celebration." I walked out of Marcel's into the humid summer night, and I never looked back at their table. I didn't return to their house that night or any night after. The next 3 years were brutal. I'm not going to romanticize the struggle because there was nothing romantic about it. Entrepreneurship looks glamorous on Instagram, but the reality was me sleeping on an air mattress in the back office of my store because I couldn't afford both rent and inventory. It was winter nights when the heating system would fail and I'd wake up shivering despite being buried under every blanket I owned. It was eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for weeks straight because every dollar had to go toward keeping the lights on. I worked 100-hour weeks. My hands developed calluses from assembling bookshelves and hauling shipping boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I was exhausted constantly, lonely frequently, and terrified daily that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But I was also free in a way I'd never experienced before. Every time I wanted to give up, every time the bank account hit double digits and panic threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered Julian offering me a job processing insurance paperwork. I remembered my father calling me a disgrace. And I found the strength to keep going for one more day. That's when Janelle entered my life. She wasn't a customer initially. She was attending a community meeting I'd hosted about literacy programs in underserved neighborhoods. She saw me afterward, exhausted and underfed, struggling to stack chairs, and instead of pitying me, she stayed to help. She believed in my vision when I barely believed in myself, when I was sleeping in my store and showering at the gym. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, then all at once, things began to shift. My focus on African American authors, my community events, my willingness to host book clubs and poetry slams, it all created a loyal customer base that spread the word organically. A local news station did a feature on Black-owned businesses, and Renaissance Pages was prominently featured, bringing a flood of new customers. I hired my first employee, then my second, then my third. Now, 6 years later, Renaissance Pages is not just surviving, it's thriving. I have author events that draw hundreds of people, a cafe partnership that brings in steady revenue, and a reputation as the cultural hub of the city's literary community. I have contracts with schools and libraries. I have a life that I built with my own hands. The memory dissolved as the phone finally stopped ringing. Silence returned to my bookstore, broken only by the gentle jazz playing through the overhead speakers. I looked at Janelle, who was watching me with the careful attention of someone trained to recognize trauma responses. "It stopped," I said, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding in my chest. But then the voicemail notification appeared, a small red number, one that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You have one new voicemail. You don't have to listen to it," Janelle said gently, rising from the chair with some effort. "You don't owe them anything, Marcus. Not your time, not your attention, not even your curiosity." "I know," I replied, staring at that notification like it might explode. "But if I don't listen, I'll spend the next week wondering what was so important after 6 years of silence. Maybe someone died. Maybe someone's sick and needs a kidney or something." I pressed the speaker button before I could change my mind. The store filled with static, and then my mother's voice, smooth and professional as always. "Marcus, darling, it's your mother," she began, her tone warm in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. We saw the article in Metropolitan magazine about your bookstore. We had absolutely no idea you were doing so well. We're so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. Listen, your father and I both agree that enough time has passed. We really need to talk with you about some family matters. Please come by the house tonight for dinner if you can. We miss you terribly." The message ended with a soft click. "Darling," I scoffed, leaning against the counter. "She hasn't called me darling since I was in elementary school." "And proud," Janelle added, her social worker instincts picking up every manipulation tactic. "She's laying it on thick. They want something, Marcus. This isn't about reconciliation. This is about transaction." "Obviously," I agreed, running my hand over my face. "They disowned me for 6 years, don't come to our wedding, don't acknowledge our anniversary cards. Nothing. And suddenly I'm darling because I made the cover of a magazine. So what are you going to do?" Janelle asked, moving closer to me. "Are you going to go?" I looked out the window at the street, watching people walk by with their morning coffees and their oblivious contentment. "I think I have to," I finally said. "Not because I want a relationship with them, but because I need to prove to myself that they don't have power over me anymore. I need to look them in the eye as the man I've become and see that their disapproval can't hurt me now. Plus," I added, "if I don't go, they'll probably just show up here and make a scene. I don't want them anywhere near my store or my employees." "I'm coming with you," Janelle stated firmly, crossing her arms over her belly. "No," I shook my head. "You stay here or go home and rest your feet. I don't want you in that environment, not with the baby. That kind of stress isn't good for either of you. I'll handle this quickly and come home." I drove to their house that evening, my hands steady on the wheel despite the turmoil in my chest. They lived in Thornwood Estates, A gated community where everyone measured their worth by their property values and their children's credentials. As I pulled up to their driveway, I noticed the house looked exactly the same but somehow diminished. Maybe it was just my perspective changing, or maybe the paint really was more faded than I remembered. I parked my modest but reliable sedan next to my father's Mercedes and my mother's Lexus. The contrast was almost comical, a representation of different value systems colliding in a driveway. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the warm evening air. The front door opened before I could ring the bell, like they'd been watching from the window. Patricia stood there wearing a cream-colored pantsuit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes at all. She looked older, the lines around her mouth deeper, her hair more gray than I remembered. "Marcus!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a perfumed embrace that felt rehearsed. "Look at you. You look so bohemian." "Hello, Mother," I said, extracting myself from the hug as quickly as politeness allowed. I stepped into the foyer and the smell hit me immediately. Expensive candles and furniture polish, the scent of a museum, not a home. Leonard was standing in the living room holding a glass of bourbon, wearing slacks and a polo shirt. He didn't hug me. He simply nodded in acknowledgement. "Son," he said, his tone neutral. "Dr. Hayes," I replied, deliberately formal. I wasn't ready to call him Dad. Might never be ready again. We moved into the living room, that pristine space with white furniture that was designed for showing off rather than actual comfort. They served me sparkling water in crystal glasses that probably cost more than my first month's inventory. I sat on the edge of their designer sofa, feeling out of place in my casual button-down and jeans, my shoulders too broad for their delicate furniture. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us like a chasm. "So," Leonard began, swirling his bourbon, "we saw the revenue figures mentioned in the magazine article. 6 figures annually. Is that accurate or journalistic embellishment?" "It's accurate," I said simply. "Actually, those numbers were from 2 quarters ago. We've grown considerably since then." They exchanged a look, quick but unmistakable, the kind of look that said they were recalculating my worth. "We never imagined that selling books could be quite so profitable," Patricia said, attempting to sound complimentary but failing. "I mean, who knew there was that much money in, well, that kind of literature?" That kind of literature. The casual racism, even toward her own son's work, was breathtaking. "African American literature," I corrected firmly. "Black authors, black stories, black excellence. That's my focus. And yes, there's significant demand for it." I looked around the room, noting the absence I'd expected to feel. "Where's Julian?" I assumed the golden child would be here to celebrate his latest achievement. The atmosphere shifted immediately, becoming heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. Leonard took a long drink of his bourbon while Patricia's smile faltered completely. "Julian he's going through a difficult transition," Patricia said carefully, her hands fidgeting with her pearls. "A transition?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "He's resting," Leonard added quickly. "Upstairs. He's been under a tremendous amount of stress. He was let go from the hospital," Patricia blurted out, her composure cracking. 8 months ago. It was completely unjust, of course. Political maneuvering and scapegoating after a patient outcome that wasn't his fault. "Julian was fired?" I asked, genuinely shocked despite myself. "The youngest chief resident in the program's history was fired? It's been devastating for him," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He lost his condo, his car was repossessed, and he's been living in the guest room for nearly 6 months. He barely leaves the room, Marcus. He won't talk to his colleagues, won't seek therapy. He's deeply depressed." I sat back, processing this information. The image of Julian, confident and condescending Julian, hiding in his childhood bedroom unemployed and broken, was jarring. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but then I remembered that insurance paperwork comment and the sympathy cooled considerably. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But why did you call me here after 6 years of silence? To inform me that Julian is struggling?" Leonard set his glass down with a heavy thud that seemed deliberate. "No," he said, his authoritative voice returning. We called you here because you're going to help him. You're going to fix this situation. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Fix it how exactly? I run a bookstore, not a hospital. I can't get him reinstated. Don't be obtuse, Leonard snapped, his old condescension surfacing. We have a proposal for you. Julian needs a position that matches his qualifications and status. Patricia explained, leaning forward. Something that will allow him to rebuild his confidence and his resume. And you have a business, a successful one according to the magazine. You're going to hire him. I almost laughed at the audacity. You want me to hire Julian? To do what exactly? I don't need a surgeon. I need booksellers and event coordinators. Does Julian know anything about retail or literature? Don't be ridiculous, Leonard scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. He's not going to work on the sales floor like some minimum wage employee. You're going to make him your business manager or operations director. Someone with Julian's intellect and pedigree can professionalize your operation, bring some real structure and credibility to your little venture. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. My little venture is professionally run and credible as it stands. And Julian has zero experience in retail, publishing, or small business management. He's a surgeon, or was. He's your brother? Patricia said, her voice taking on that guilt-inducing tone she'd perfected over decades. He's family, Marcus. We gave you both everything growing up, every advantage. Now you're in a position to help him when he needs it most. And you're sitting here hesitating like we're asking for something unreasonable. It's the very least you can do after the worry you caused us. Running off impulsively like you did. The revisionist history was staggering. They'd disowned me, and now they were framing my departure as some adolescent rebellion. Does Julian know you're asking me this? I asked, a crucial question forming in my mind. Well, we told him we'd handle the situation, Leonard said evasively, not quite meeting my eyes. He's too fragile to advocate for himself right now. That's why we're doing this for him. So Julian doesn't know. I concluded, my voice hardening. You want me to hand an executive position to a man who mocked my dreams, who knows nothing about my industry, just to soothe his ego and your embarrassment? And you expect me to do this after you disowned me for 6 years? We didn't disown you, Patricia lied smoothly, her face a mask of injured innocence. We were giving you space to mature and find your way. And look, it worked perfectly. You're successful now. We motivated you to prove yourself. That was the final straw. The complete rewriting of history, the shameless manipulation, the utter lack of accountability. I stood up, my full height suddenly feeling powerful in their pristine living room. No, I said simply. What did you say to me? Leonard stood up too, trying to intimidate me with his presence like he did when I was a child. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was a man who'd survived poverty and rejection and built something meaningful anyway. I said no, I repeated louder this time. Julian has no relevant experience, and more importantly, I don't hire people who've disrespected me and my vision. And I certainly don't hire people because their parents demand it 6 years after cutting me off. You ungrateful! Leonard started, his face reddening with rage. I'm leaving now, I said, turning toward the door. Don't contact me again unless it's with a genuine apology. A real one, not whatever performance this was supposed to be. I walked out of their house, their voices rising in protest behind me, and I felt lighter with every step. I didn't even make it out of Thornwood Estates before my phone started going absolutely crazy. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It sat in the cup holder of my car, lighting up the darkening interior with each notification. I glanced down at it briefly while stopped at the gate. Text messages, multiple ones, coming in rapid succession. Leonard, you ungrateful son of a bitch. You think you're better than us now because you sold some books? Leonard, we made you what you are. We can destroy your reputation in this city. I know people on every board that matters. Patricia, Marcus, please. Your father is very upset. Just reconsider this. Julian is suffering. Don't be selfish now. Leonard, answer your phone. Coward. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb, allowing only calls from Janelle to come through. I drove home in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away and leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. When I got home, Janelle was waiting up in the living room despite the late hour. She took one look at my face and wordlessly handed me a glass of wine. "That bad?" she asked gently. "Worse?" I sighed, sinking into the couch beside her. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted me to hire Julian as some executive position to repair his ego. He crashed and burned, got fired, and they want me to save him. "You're joking," Janelle said, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was," I replied. I said no, obviously. "And now?" I gestured to my silenced phone, which was still lighting up periodically. "They're having a meltdown." Janelle picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages, her expression shifting from concern to disgust. "We motivated you," she read aloud incredulously. "They kicked you out with nothing and now they're taking credit for your success?" "Don't read them," I said, taking the phone back. "It's just noise. They're desperate because their golden child fell apart and the disgrace became successful. They can't handle the cognitive dissonance." "Silence is the best response," Janelle said firmly. "Don't reply to any of this. Whatever you say, they'll weaponize it or twist it. Just let them scream into the void." I nodded, setting the phone aside. "You're right. I'm done with them. This chapter is closed." But it wasn't closed. They weren't done with me yet. The next day at the store was relatively normal, though I was on edge the entire time. I kept expecting Leonard to show up and cause a scene in front of customers. But he didn't. They went completely silent after the initial text barrage, and I thought maybe they'd realized they'd overplayed their hand. I was wrong. They weren't giving up. They were just changing tactics. It was 2 days later, a quiet Wednesday evening. Janelle was at a prenatal yoga class, and I was home alone catching up on inventory orders on my laptop. Most of my inbox was routine: publisher catalogs, event confirmations, vendor invoices, the usual business correspondence. Then an email appeared in my personal inbox, standing out among the clutter. Subject: "You'll regret this." Sender: concerned_citizen_1987@mailnet.com. The sender was obviously fake, but that number, 1987, that was the year my parents got married. My stomach turned to ice. I opened the email with a sense of dread, and what I read made my vision narrow to a tunnel. "Marcus, you think you're a big man now? You're nothing but a cold, selfish traitor who turned his back on family when they needed you most. You let your own brother suffer and spiral into depression while you sit in your comfortable life. But don't worry. God sees everything, and karma is coming for you soon. We know your wife is pregnant with a boy. Do you really think you deserve to be a father? You who abandoned your own blood without a second thought. I hope that baby never draws a breath in this cruel world. A monster like you doesn't deserve a legacy or the joy of fatherhood. Maybe when you lose what you love most, you'll finally understand the pain you've inflicted on us. That child is cursed because of you. It would be a mercy if it didn't survive to see what a pathetic excuse for a father it has." The world stopped. I couldn't hear the refrigerator humming or the traffic outside my window. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears, like standing next to a waterfall. I read the line again, slower this time, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. "I hope that baby never draws a breath in this cruel world." This wasn't anger or frustration. This was evil, pure and calculated. This was a line so far beyond acceptable that I couldn't even process it fully. They had dragged my innocent, unborn son into their narcissistic game, wished death on him, cursed him for the crime of being my child. My hands weren't shaking. That's what scared me most. When my father disowned me 6 years ago, I trembled with hurt and fear. Now I was completely still, frozen in a cold rage that felt almost surgical in its precision. I stood up slowly, walked to my printer, and printed the email. The paper emerged from the machine, physical proof of their malice, evidence of a boundary crossed that could never be uncrossed. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, then grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. I walked to the bathroom and knocked on the doorframe, even though Janelle wasn't home yet. Then I caught myself, realizing what I was doing, operating on autopilot while my mind processed the unprocessable. I sent Janelle a text, forgot to grab milk earlier. Running to the store quick. Back in 30 minutes. Love you. I didn't want her to know where I was really going. I didn't want her to see this email or feel the stress of what I was about to do. Stress could harm the baby, and I would burn their entire world down before I let them hurt my family. I drove to Thornwood Estates with purpose, my speed exactly at the limit, my movements controlled. I needed to be calm and precise. If I let rage drive my actions and did something reckless, I could end up arrested, and then they would win. Couldn't let them win. I pulled up to their house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The lights were on inside, warm and inviting from the outside, hiding the coldness within. I walked up the driveway, my footsteps crunching on their expensive gravel, and I didn't ring the doorbell. I pounded on the door. 3 hard, deliberate knocks that echoed through the evening quiet. The door opened seconds later. Leonard stood there looking annoyed, probably expecting a delivery driver or solicitor. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, when he saw the expression on my face. I had never seen my father look afraid of me before, but he took an actual step backward. "Marcus," he started, his voice uncertain. Patricia appeared behind him, her face a mixture of surprise and something that might have been guilt. "Did you come to apologize?" she asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Are you ready to be reasonable?" I didn't say anything. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the folded printout, and threw it at Leonard's chest. It fluttered to the ground between us. "Read it," I said, my voice low and cold, barely above a whisper but carrying more weight than a shout ever could. Leonard bent down and picked it up with shaking hands. He read it, his face going pale. He looked at Patricia, who read it over his shoulder, and for just a moment, I saw genuine shame flicker across her features before she buried it under defensiveness. We were just upset," Patricia stammered, her composure cracking. "We didn't mean it literally, Marcus. You pushed us to say things we didn't mean. This is really your fault for being so stubborn. You called me a disgrace because I chose books over medicine." I cut her off, my voice rising slightly. "You disowned me because my dreams didn't match your country club conversations. But these hands," I held up my hands, palms forward. "These hands built a business that serves my community. These hands are building a home for my wife and son. Your hands," I pointed at them, "your hands wrote that filth about my unborn child." "Marcus, if you'll just listen," Leonard started, trying to reassert authority. "No," I said, stepping forward into their doorway, invading their space. "You listen to me now. You want Julian to have a job? Tell him to apply like anyone else. But you two, you're dead to me now." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "If you ever contact Janelle again, if you ever come near my bookstore or my home, if you ever speak my son's name, I will take this email and I will make it public. I will send it to every member of your church, every colleague at your hospital, every neighbor in this development, every person at your country club. I will make sure everyone knows exactly who Dr. Leonard Hayes and Dr. Patricia Hayes really are behind the degrees and the designer clothes." They stood there, frozen, finally understanding that they had miscalculated completely. The threat of social humiliation, their greatest fear, had paralyzed them. "You wanted a successful son," I said, turning to leave. "Congratulations, you created one. And he wants nothing to do with you." 5 days passed in tense silence. I hadn't heard anything from my parents, not a text, not a call, not even a flying monkey sent to plead their case. The threat of exposure had worked. They were terrified of their carefully constructed reputation crumbling. I was at the bookstore, meeting with a publisher's representative about an exclusive author event, when my phone rang. Julian. I stared at the name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. I didn't want to hear excuses or justifications. I didn't want him to beg for a job or try to manipulate me on our parents' behalf. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe the ghost of childhood brotherhood, made me answer. What? I said flatly, not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus. The voice on the other end didn't sound like the golden child I remembered. It sounded hollow, broken, like someone who'd been crying for days. If you're calling about the job, the answer is still no, I said, keeping my voice cold. Job? What job? Julian asked, sounding genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I paused, thrown off balance. The business manager position. The one Mom and Dad demanded I give you. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by Julian's breathing. They asked you for a job for me? He finally said, his voice barely a whisper. They didn't ask, I corrected. They demanded. They said you were desperate, that you needed me to save you, that it was my family obligation. Oh my God, Julian breathed out. Marcus, I swear to you I didn't know. I explicitly told them not to contact you. I told them I just needed time to figure out my next steps on my own. You didn't know? I repeated, skepticism clear in my voice. No, Julian insisted, his voice cracking. They've been controlling everything since I moved back. They treat me like I'm incompetent, like I'm a child who can't function. I told them to leave you alone, that what happened between us was my fault and my responsibility to fix someday, not theirs. They sent me an email, Julian, I said, my anger shifting direction slightly. They wished death on my unborn son because I refused to hire you. They called my child cursed. They did what? Julian's voice went up sharply. Please tell me you're lying. Please, Marcus. I wish I was, I said quietly. Julian started crying then. Not loud sobs, but quiet, broken weeping that spoke of something fundamental shattering inside him. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Mark. I'm a mess. I hated that job, you know. I hated every single day of being chief resident. I was miserable for years but too afraid to disappoint them. When I watched you walk out of that restaurant, I was jealous of your courage. Jealous? I asked, genuinely surprised. I was sleeping in my store, eating ramen every day. What was there to be jealous of? Your freedom, Julian said simply. You were doing what you actually wanted to do, what made you happy. I was just their puppet, performing for their approval. And now the strings are cut and I don't know who I am without them pulling me. That conversation changed everything. Julian wasn't the villain of my story. He was another victim of Leonard and Patricia's narcissism, just damaged in different ways. Later that evening, Julian packed his belongings and left our parents' house. He told them he knew about the email, that he knew what they'd said about my son. He told them he was done being their trophy, their second chance, their proof of concept. Predictably, Leonard and Patricia didn't take it well. Losing one son to independence was unfortunate. Losing both was a complete collapse of their carefully managed image. So they did what narcissists always do when they lose control of the narrative. They tried to create a new one. That night, my cousin Aisha sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post Patricia had written. It was a masterpiece of manipulation and victimhood. My heart is breaking tonight. Our son Julian has been battling severe depression, and despite our best efforts to help him, his brother Marcus has refused to offer any support or assistance. Not only has Marcus refused to help his own flesh and blood, but he came to our home and threatened us, his elderly parents, simply because we asked for a small favor to help Julian. It's devastating to raise a child who becomes so cruel and cold-hearted. Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time. The post already had 37 likes and a dozen sympathetic comments from their church friends and neighbors who knew nothing about the real story. I showed it to Janelle, who was curled up beside me on the couch. Should I post the email publicly? I asked. Should I expose them for what they really are? You don't have to, she said, pointing at the screen. Look at the new comment that just appeared. I refreshed the page and saw a comment from Aunt Diane, my father's older sister and the only family member who'd ever seen through their facade. Aunt Diane had written, Patricia, delete this manipulative nonsense immediately. I have seen the email you sent to Marcus wishing death on his unborn child. You are not the victim here. You disowned Marcus 6 years ago for choosing his own path, and now you want access to his success. Delete this post right now, or I will post screenshots of your vile email in these comments for everyone to see. You should be ashamed of yourselves. It was a nuclear strike, surgical and devastating. Within 15 minutes, Patricia's post was deleted. Then Julian posted his own status, simple and direct. I'm taking time away from family to focus on my mental health and recovery. For the record, my brother Marcus has done nothing wrong and has been nothing but respectful. My parents' recent statements do not represent the truth. Please respect my privacy during this time. The family network lit up. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins, aunts, and uncles I hadn't heard from in years, all apologizing for believing my parents' version of events, all expressing support. Leonard and Patricia were effectively socially isolated, cut off from the family network they'd always used for validation. They retreated into their perfect house in their perfect neighborhood, alone with their wounded pride. 7 months later, the hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. Janelle was sleeping, exhausted but peaceful, her face still showing the strain of 12 hours of labor. And in my arms, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, was my son, Isaiah. He was tiny, his small fingers wrapped around my index finger, gripping it with surprising strength. I looked down at him and felt a love so overwhelming it actually hurt, a physical ache in my chest. I looked at my hands, the hands that had shelved thousands of books, the hands that my parents had dismissed. They were strong enough to build a business but gentle enough to hold this fragile new life. I will never be like them, I whispered to Isaiah, my voice thick with emotion. You can be whatever you want, son. You can be a doctor, a teacher, an artist, or a mechanic. You can fail and struggle and change your mind 100 times. And I will love you exactly the same. You will never have to earn your place in my life or perform for my approval. There was a soft knock on the door. Julian stood there, looking different from the last time I'd seen him. He'd lost the expensive clothes and the corporate veneer. He was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, and he looked tired but lighter somehow. He was working at a coffee shop now, making barely above minimum wage while he figured out what actually made him happy. He was in therapy twice a week, untangling decades of conditional love and perfectionism. Hey, he whispered, stepping inside carefully. Can I meet him? Yeah, I said, my throat tight. Come meet your nephew, Uncle Julian. He walked over and looked down at Isaiah, and tears immediately filled his eyes. He's perfect, Mark, Julian said softly. He really is. We went to the hospital cafeteria later, after Janelle woke up and shooed us out so she could nurse. It was awkward sitting across from Julian, years of resentment and competition and pain sitting between us like a third presence. But for the first time, we were talking as ourselves, not as rivals in our parents' endless game. They called me yesterday, Julian said, stirring his coffee absently. Mom and Dad, they said they're willing to forgive us if we come to Thanksgiving. They said they're ready to move forward as a family. I laughed, a genuine, incredulous laugh. They're willing to forgive us? That's generous of them. I blocked their numbers, Julian said, meeting my eyes. I thought you should know. I'm done letting them rewrite history. I'm done performing for their approval. Good, I said sincerely. I blocked them 7 months ago. Best decision I ever made. We sat there in silence for a while, drinking terrible hospital coffee and watching the night shift staff come and go. I realized that my parents had been right about one thing, though not in the way they intended. I was a disgrace to their legacy of conditional love, emotional manipulation, and status obsession. And thank God for that, because their legacy was poison and I had finally found the antidote. They wanted golden children, perfect trophies to display. I just wanted to be a good man, a good husband, a good father. I think I finally know which one is worth more. Thank you for watching all the way through. There's another story to your left screen. You'll enjoy it more than this one.